Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night. What immortal hand or eye could frame that fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer, what the chain, in what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamp make thee? Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry?
William Blake, artist, poet, philosopher, visionary. His visions began in childhood and recurred throughout his life, and they appear to have inspired a good part of his work. But what did he actually see?
So when he was about 4, he saw something. He was walking in this open green space, and I think the sunlight on the leaves of the tree was perhaps very, very bright. And he was very small, 4 years old is quite small. To him, he saw angels sitting in the tree.
What?
Winged angels. And then when he's about 8, I think, he saw again these angelic beings walking amongst the harvesters, the people working in the field.
Yes.
And he saw these other beings walking among them, and they were not apparently of this earth. And a lot of the heads that he drew, there's a lot of portraits, a lot of sketches, and apparently he could see dead people. He could see personalities from the past. Edward III, there's quite a few sketches of Edward III. Historical, like Nelson, Wat Tyler, he led the Peasants' Revolution in the Middle Ages. Old Tom Parr, the spirit of Voltaire.
Oh.
If you look at the statues, the busts of Voltaire, yeah, that could look like him. But then he might have copied that from a painting, you don't know. Owen Glendower, imagination of a man who Mr. Blake has received instruction in painting from. And there's also a portrait of the man who built the pyramids.
Wow.
And it just goes on. There's all sorts. The suggestion is that one of these was his spirit guide.
Mm-hmm.
According to this account, he drew this portrait, but what he draws is not truly human-like.
I just saw on his Wikipedia page there was the spirit of a flea.
Yeah, because that looks reptilian or insect-like.
It's like, wow.
Like, where's this coming from? Is it active imagination that he hung on to from childhood? And they referred to his eidetic imagery or imagination, and that's something that children can have, but they very often grow out of it.
Yeah.
And he didn't, perhaps. And then other people just thought he was mad, When you think about the lizard people theory.
Is he one of the few who thought there would be lizard people?
He doesn't refer to them as that. For him, this is just a vision. This is his spirit guide.
Wow.
William Blake drew the original sketch for the Ghost of the Flea at a meeting or séance held by his good friend John Varney, who wrote, among other things, a zodiacal physiognomy, in which he describes the event. With respect to the vision of the Ghost of the Flea seen by Blake, this spirit visited his imagination in such a figure as he never anticipated in an insect. As I was anxious to make the most correct investigation in my power of the truth of these visions, on hearing of this spiritual apparition of a flea, I asked him if he could draw for me the resemblance of what he saw. He instantly said, "I see him now before me." I therefore gave him paper and a pencil, with which he drew the portrait. I felt convinced by his mode of proceeding that he had a real image before him, for he left off, and began on another part of the paper to make a separate drawing of the mouth of the flea, which the spirit having opened, he was prevented from proceeding with the first sketch till he had closed it. During the time occupied in completing the drawing, the flea told him that all fleas were inhabited by the souls of such men as were by nature bloodthirsty to excess, and were therefore providentially confined to the size and form of insects. Otherwise, were he himself, for instance, the size of a horse, he would depopulate a great portion of the country. He added that if, in attempting to leap from one island to another, he should fall into the sea, he could swim and should not be lost. This spirit afterwards appeared to Blake, and afforded him a view of his whole figure, an engraving of which I shall give in this work. From John Varney's Zodiacal Physiognomy, 1828. It has been suggested that Blake was simply humouring Varney, although this does not account for the many other visions Blake described elsewhere.
What he describes are very similar to people who've described extraterrestrials. He was also a follower of Swedenborg. But the beliefs of Swedenborg was in extraterrestrials.
Wow.
And then other theories that, those near-death experiences, NDE. So there's Grayson's scale.
Yes.
And that's the list of the kind of visions people have after or during a near-death experience. And it looks as though Blake experienced all but two in the list, in the scale.
What were these two ones?
Yeah, here we go. You've got the Grayson scale, experiencing an altered state of time, experiencing accelerated thought processes, sense of sudden understanding, feelings of peace, feeling of joy, feeling of cosmic oneness, having vivid sensations, extrasensory perception, experiencing visions. So this article suggests by Eric Leo on his own blog, so he's written a book about Blake. He suggests that Blake experienced all of these except for experiencing a sense of a border or point of no return, and the life review, when somebody's life flashes past them.
Yes.
Yeah, so he's saying those two he doesn't think Blake experienced, but we can see in his writings that he's describing very much it fits in with the Grayson scale otherwise. So is he psychic? Is it sixth sense? Is it, is he a sensitive?
Is he being like a medium or something without knowing it?
Yeah, there's a portal. Or is he seeing extraterrestrials? Are they all aliens he's seeing? Or is it a mixture?
It's so strange that he has been confronted to so many visions, because you could have visions and you say, no, that's probably nothing, But it happens so many times to him. You're like, okay.
Yeah, he seems to have just accepted it. It was something he could see, and other people couldn't. And again, is it that eidetic imagery or imagination is a very active imagination that just stayed with him? He mentions in a letter to his friend Haley that 13 years ago I lost a brother, and with his spirit I converse daily and hourly in the spirit, and see him in my remembrance. In the region of my imagination, I hear his advice and even now write from his dictate. But that's a mixture to my mind. He mentions imagination, he mentions memory. So the conversation he's having, he says it's in the spirit. So is that in his mind? He's remembering him every day. What he's hearing in his head is what he imagines his brother would say.
Said or something.
Yeah, that's something we can all do.
Yeah, you can perfectly imagine what your father, mother, or any sibling would say. If it's not there anymore, you would think, oh yeah, my brother would advise me to do that. But in the same time, he's like, I discuss him how hourly. Probably it's this. Probably he's imagining what he thinks his brother would have said. But in the same time, you're like, so you see your brother every day, do you?
It slips into the conversation as something real. But in the letter, he's saying very clearly, in the region of my imagination. He's not saying this is external to his mind. So that seems a bit different.
It's more like a feeling, basically.
Yeah. Or is he trying to describe what he's experiencing, and this is how he's trying to make sense of it?
Perhaps.
It may have been his way of dealing with the loss, or did he see his brother's ghost?
It's kind of weird. I was looking at his paintings.
Oh, yeah.
You realize the style, it's so different from what we used to see, because I didn't realize he paint the Great Red Dragon, like the painting is very.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
It's a vision that I have never seen before. Also, his own vision of the Minotaur, it's mythological and you can see it, but it's completely different of the common representation, Christianity, Greek mythology, or anything they've done before.
How is it different?
If you see, like William Blake's Minotaur, he's more like a centaur.
Is that the one where he's on the cliff top?
Yes, indeed. And even the red dragon, is kind of half a dragon, half man, half butterfly or whatever, because he has very strange wings. The woman in gold, is looking like an angel, and in the same time the form of a heart. I don't know, it probably has nothing to do, but the imagery in itself is really strange.
It is. All of them are. There's tons of stuff. You look at that and it's, where did it come from? For me, it's a little bit reminiscent of Hieronymus Bosch in some ways. Not in the detail and not to quite the same extent, but extra dimensional. You ask yourself, where? Okay, he saw this in dreams, did he?
It's like I'm just seeing his painting of Isaac Newton, I suppose,
oh, yeah,
doing his work. And I mean, I see him he's completely naked, and I don't know if he's underwater or something. He's in a stone covered of something from the sea. It's so weird.
yeah. I guess it looks like Newton, but it's not quite. And he's sitting, isn't he? A bit like Rodin's Thinker. He's leaning forward, looking down.
It's so strange. It's completely different from what I've seen before.
Because it's like he's treating him as though he is a mythical being. He's treating him like a god in some sense. He's giving him that same.
It's funny, because you said earlier that William Blake was perhaps he had vision, or perhaps we don't know if it's visions or coming from a vivid imagination. And I realized when I see a painting from Blake, or I read a poem from Blake, it's yes, it's a poem, or yes, it's a painting, but I've never seen anything like it. It's it comes from his very self, rather than some painters, some writers. You can say, oh, I see what's his reference here. But here, it's he is its own reference. He's in the very core of creation. And it's not like someone who will be creative, make a creation, but you'll still notice, oh yeah, I see your influence there. Oh yeah, I see this. No, Blake is okay, Isaac Newton, we used to say, Blake will make it like the Rodin Thinker, with a compass, even a Greek statue, to be fair, a god,
Yes.
you said.
Yeah.
Or the Minotaur, like a Centaurus, but with a Minotaur's head.
Well, he kind of says this of himself. He's very thankful that he was allowed to not go to school after the age of 10, because that meant that he wasn't influenced then. He wasn't molded into somebody else's. He read for himself, he learned for himself, and maybe that has helped him to become, in a way, like Da Vinci, like Leonardo.
Wow, so I didn't know that he really stopped school at an early age.
Pretty much teaching himself as Leonardo did. So in that sense, that allows him to be unique because he's not being influenced by others. Okay, he followed Swedenborg. He at the same time built his own belief system, He didn't accept organized religions. He wasn't keen on them. His spirituality is around basic human rights of freedom, equality, free love, plus the Swedenborg, plus Neoplatonism. I think that was the other.
Instead of school, William's parents enrolled him in drawing lessons at Henry Parr's establishment in the Strand. He read widely on subjects of his own choosing and started exploring poetry. This was followed by an apprenticeship to the engraver James Bassier in 1772, which lasted 7 years, leaving him a professional engraver at the age of 21.
So it's like he doesn't have the boundaries that probably some people, used to say, in school, I don't go to school, or I don't do any classes, because, it put boundaries to your creativity.
Yeah.
People would say that, consider education not like a way to learn technical things, but rather something that will put borders to your creativity. And it feels like Blake was actually the only limit was himself. So he created his own world with no boundaries, no real collective imagination. He had to build his own.
Yes. And it's quite interesting, his rebellion against areas of art where he felt it was unfinished. So, for instance, he didn't care for Rubens, Joshua Reynolds. He preferred Raphael.
Wow.
And you see that in his drawings, actually. If you look at the way the faces, in particular the bodies, they're like a bit like Fuseli in some ways, and they're sculpted on the paper. You see all the planes of the face very carefully.
Yes.
Yeah, you see what I mean. And that's as if they were being carved out of the paper. There's that sense of three-dimensional and very precise, and very much, yes, the big romantics, but quite different from people like Lord Byron and Shelley.
Fuseli and Blake were contemporaries, although Fuseli was 16 years the older of the two. The two artists worked together on illustrations for Erasmus Darwin's The Botanic Garden, published in 1791. Both artists shared the liberal views expressed in the book. An example of their collaboration is the Fertilization of Egypt, featuring Anubis praying for rain. Blake created the engraving based on the original design by Fuseli. As to who influenced who, opinions may be divided, but as is often the case, it is entirely possible that the two artists influenced each other in equal degrees. What does remain is a poem written in tribute to Fuseli by Blake. The only man that ever I knew who did not make me almost spew was Fuseli. He was both Turk and Jew, and so, dear Christian friends, how do you do?
And you talked about freedom, and I just saw, like, when you were speaking, I was looking to Blake's painting, and I see a painting which is Europe supported by Africa and America.
Oh, yeah.
And when you look at it, it's a trio of women.
Yeah.
So a white woman in the middle, and the two others being a black woman and an American Indian woman, actually.
Yes.
And that's a really strong image.
Very, yes. So, I mean, it sums up a good deal of his belief, general equality, gender equality, racial equality. And for him, the upper class institutions, the Church of England, these were, for him, very corrupt institutions, very exploitative, which a lot of people wouldn't agree with him today, too. But this is where it gets interesting. Okay, he's been linked to Swedenborg. Swedenborg is also supposed to have had visions of the Last Judgment, the Second Coming. Yeah, maybe he's drawn to that. And he wasn't the only one, because Swedenborg has influenced people like, Balzac. We were talking about Balzac the other day. Baudelaire.
I didn't know they were inspired by Swedenborg.
Apparently, yeah. The Brownings, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Walt
No
Whitman.
way.
Yeah. Yeah. So we can certainly add that into the mix when we come to do any of the others.
Oh, wow.
But I thought that bit about the reptilian face, the ghost of the flea,
Yes, it's frightening.
Isn't it?
It's like you see the flea like it reminds me of a legend, but I try to remember where it come from. I don't know in which religion or culture it says like, but apparently there was a legend 1 or 2 centuries ago that spirits of people who had the worst life ever, they sooner or later got reincarnated into fleas or bugs. It's like a punishment, like your next reincarnation will be a fly or a flea or, the sort of being that could easily die, easily despised, easily.
Yeah, and then they start again in the next life, a little bit higher up, we hope, or is it the end? Is it the end for them? Isn't that also? Is that not in Plato?
Is it?
I'm just trying to remember
I
because
know there were little ones who he defended a dog who was beaten up by people, and he said to the man who was beating up the dog, "Don't touch it. This dog was one of my friends."
Who was that? Plato?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that rings a bell.
Or Socrates, I'm not sure, but one of them was believing in reincarnation and was able perhaps to remember through beings who was the person he was meeting. He said, "This man or this dog was one of my friends." But yeah, the painting of the spirit of a flea is just like frightening.
Oh, it looks a bit vaguely familiar, doesn't it? Have you seen any of the cartoons or the
Looney Tunes, the Tex Avery's, the Disney's, or any other
graphic novels, comic novels, animations? They have them on Netflix also, and they bring in the lizard people, and it looks a bit like some of the cartoons.
It reminds me, when I saw the spirit of the flea, it's like a demonic version or distorted version of a human being.
It's clever, isn't it?
Which is a nice, very...
Which you almost might not notice him if he walked past you. Almost.
Yeah.
But it's a bit unsettling at the same time.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Ah!
Yes, it's enough to give you nightmares, isn't it? And he was pretty good at creating horrific imagery with his words, wasn't he?
Yeah. It's the first time I hear about Swedenborg. I'd never heard of him before you tell me.
It's not something I remember associated particularly with him. And yet, when you see the connections, yes, there is some.
Wow.
You do see how that could come into.
I'm just, I'm on the Swedenborg page.
Oh yeah.
There is a book they talk about, the Journal of Dreams.
Yes.
Oh, I would love to read it actually.
Yes, that is quite interesting. I've only seen parts of it, but it is interesting.
Oh, in 1745, age of 57, Swedenborg was dining in a private room at a tavern in London. By the end of the meal, a darkness fell upon his eyes, and the room shifted character. Suddenly, he saw a person sitting at a corner of the room, telling him, "Do not eat too much." Swedenborg, scared, hurried home. Later that night, the same man appeared in his dreams. He told Swedenborg that he was the Lord, that he had appointed Swedenborg to reveal the spiritual meaning of the Bible, that he would guide Swedenborg in what to write. The same night, the spiritual world was open to Swedenborg.
Emanuel Swedenborg was born in Stockholm, Sweden in 1688 and died in London, England in 1772. He began as a scientist but left his academic career after a series of visual experiences or visions to pursue theological and mystic studies, devoting much of his time to describing the visions he experienced. His works included a volume entitled The Earths in the Universe, where he claimed to be in contact with spirits from planets both in the solar system, such as Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and the Moon, and planets beyond the solar system. Who can ever think that so vast a means as the universe exists for so small and limited an end as there would be if only one earth were inhabited, and from it alone existed heaven? What would this be for the divine, which is infinite, and to which 1,000, nay myriads of earths, and all of them full of inhabitants, would be little and scarcely anything? His detailed description and interpretation of his dreams and visions were prototypes of modern dream analysis.
And do you remember when reading Sheridan Le Fanu's Green Tea and the Dr. Hecelius?
Yes!
Because he references Swedenborg there, the inner eye.
Oh!
Yeah, and opening the inner eye, which of course is also a practice in meditation as well. The third eye.
The third eye. And also, I try to remember, because for me, I did a few, I still do meditation. And they always talk about, when you're overthinking. And I try to remember the exercise, but there was a moment like, try not to think with your head, but think with your heart or see with your heart.
Yes.
And there was a kind of, so I was imagining like my heart was not open in the sense that, with something like that. No, it's more like a light in my heart.
Yes.
And think through it and imagine that all that I was thinking didn't come from my brain, but from my heart. And it's like, and it's bringing an entire other way of thinking. And why do I come to this again? Yeah, no, it was just referring for the third eye, because some of the meditation said, actually, instead of talking sometimes about the third eye, they said, yes, open your eye, but also open your heart.
Yes.
So it's like you have communications through these channels rather than using the brain.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, it's a new discovery. Thank you, because I'm discovering like Swedenborg. So it's I see like the Journal of Dreams.
Yeah. And it's just interesting that connection with Swedenborg, the concept of extraterrestrials comes into being.
To see a world in a grain of sand, and a heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour.